Welcome to the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening.
On the bustling orbital trade station circling the neutral planet of Viria, the hum of interstellar commerce filled the air. Neon lights flickered over stalls selling exotic goods from distant corners of the galaxy. Amid this chaos, Tom adjusted his translator device, preparing for another day of facilitating trade negotiations. Tom, a linguist and cultural liaison, prided himself on his ability to bridge human and alien cultures. His tall frame and open, friendly expression made him a familiar figure in the station's corridors. As he made his way to the negotiation hall, he was intercepted by Max, a fellow human and security officer on the station. "Morning, Tom," Max greeted, clapping him on the back. "Heard we're expecting a new delegation today. From the Zari system, right?" "Yeah, the Zari," Tom confirmed, nodding. "Their trade routes could open up new supply lines for us. It's crucial we get this right." Before Max could reply, a commotion at the far end of the hall caught their attention. A crowd had gathered around a newcomer, a figure distinctly different from the usual station populace. She stood a head taller than most, with luminous skin and eyes that seemed to shimmer with hidden depths. She was Zari, the Zari envoy. As Tom approached, he saw Zari struggling to communicate with a vendor, her translator clearly malfunctioning. Sensing an opportunity to smooth the path, he stepped forward. "Allow me," Tom said, switching his device to the Zari language setting. "There seems to be a problem with your translator." Zari turned to him, her expression shifting from frustration to relief. "Thank you," she replied, her voice melodic but commanding. "I am Zari. It seems my device is not calibrated for your dialects." "No problem at all. I'm Tom. And this is Max," Tom said, gesturing to his companion. "We're here to help. Why don't we get your translator fixed first?" As Max led Zari to the tech kiosk, Tom followed, watching as the vendor quickly adjusted the alien device. With her translator functioning, Zari's demeanor softened noticeably. "This is my first visit to a human-operated station," Zari confessed as they walked toward the negotiation hall. "I admit, I'm a bit anxious about communicating properly." Tom smiled reassuringly. "You're doing fine. Most of us use these translators, and we're used to little hiccups. The important thing is we're all here to understand each other better." Zari nodded, looking around with evident curiosity. "Your species has a knack for creating lively marketplaces. Where I'm from, markets are silent and orderly." "That sounds different," Max commented with a chuckle. "Here, it's the chaos that keeps things interesting." They reached the negotiation hall, a vast room lined with booths representing various galactic entities. Tom gestured to a quiet corner where they could talk more privately. "As a cultural liaison, it's my job to help delegates like you navigate our customs and negotiation practices," Tom explained. "Think of me as your guide." Zari regarded him thoughtfully. "I appreciate that, Tom. I hope to learn much from you." Their conversation was briefly interrupted when Max's communicator beeped. He glanced at it and frowned. "I have to check on a security detail. Tom, can you handle things here?" "Sure thing, Max. See you later," Tom replied, turning back to Zari. "Shall we continue?" As Max departed, Tom and Zari sat down at a small table set aside for discussions. Tom began detailing the station's protocols, but Zari's attention was on the window overlooking the planet below. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Tom asked, following her gaze. "Yes, it's very different from Zealer. I find it intriguing," Zari admitted, then chuckled softly. "Your thing is mine, human." She reached out, not towards Tom, but toward the view outside, playfully mimicking a traditional Zari expression of admiration for something one desires. Tom laughed, realizing the phrase probably didn't translate well. "Well, there's plenty more to see. And hopefully, by the end of your visit, you'll take a piece of our culture back with you." As they continued their discussion, Tom felt a spark of excitement at the challenge and opportunity of bridging two vastly different cultures. Little did he know, this first encounter would mark the beginning of a significant and transformative journey, not just for him, but for both their peoples. The negotiation hall buzzed with the low hum of dozens of conversations, but Tom's focus was solely on Zari as they continued their discussion. Their table was littered with digital documents and cultural artifacts, a miniature exhibition of interstellar diplomacy. Your approach to trade is fascinating, Zyra observed, picking up a small, intricately carved model of a human merchant ship. It's so direct. Tom chuckled, pleased with her interest. Yes, we value transparency and directness in our dealings. How is it handled in Zealer? We prefer a more layered approach. Negotiations are an art form, a dance of words and gestures, Zyra explained, her hands mimicking the flow of an unseen rhythm. As they spoke, another figure approached their table. He was a middle-aged man with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze. Tom, I thought I might find you here. And you must be the Zalari delegate. I'm Richard, the station's trade director. Zyra stood, extending her hand in the human fashion she had quickly adapted to. I am Zyra. It's a pleasure to meet you, Richard. The pleasure is mine, Richard replied, taking a seat. I've been looking forward to discussing potential trade routes with your people. Tom noticed Zyra's slight hesitance, a quick flash of her eyes towards him. He quickly jumped in to ease the tension. Richard, Zyra was just explaining how negotiations are more of a cultural expression in Zealer. Perhaps we could learn a few things from each other. Indeed, Richard mused, his interest piqued. Cultural exchanges can be as valuable as economic ones. What's one tradition you think we might benefit from understanding better? Zyra thought for a moment before responding. Perhaps the concept of Isara. It's a practice of mutual respect and understanding, achieved through shared experiences rather than immediate transactions. Fascinating, Richard said, leaning in, and possibly a good foundation for our discussions. But let's talk specifics. Are there particular goods or technologies your system is keen on acquiring? Zyra glanced at Tom, who nodded encouragingly. She then turned back to Richard, her confidence growing. Renewable energy technology is highly prized in Zealer. Our solar grids are efficient, but we are always looking to improve them with advanced technologies. That's something we can offer, Tom added, pulling up a data slate with information on the latest solar tech developed by human engineers. Our new photonic cells could increase your grid efficiency by up to 20%. Richard raised his eyebrows, impressed. Good to know. What might you be interested in exchange? Zyra responded, bioluminescent flora. They're not just decorative, but also serve as a low-energy light source. They could be quite popular here. I can see it now, Richard chuckled. Glowing gardens in every station corridor. It would certainly brighten up the place. The conversation flowed smoothly from there, with Tom facilitating and clarifying points of confusion. As they discussed, he couldn't help but admire Zyra's adaptability and the way she picked up on human expressions and idioms. After Richard excused himself, promising to set up a formal meeting with broader teams, Tom and Zyra were left to reflect on the interaction. You handled that well, Tom commented, offering Zyra a supportive smile. It seems you're getting the hang of this quicker than you think. Zyra returned the smile, her earlier apprehension replaced by a spark of enthusiasm. Thanks to you, Tom. I must admit, I was nervous about misrepresenting my people or coming off as too aggressive in my negotiations. It's all about finding that balance, Tom said. And speaking of balance, how about we take a break from all this talk of trade? There's a cultural exhibit on the lower deck showcasing art from the Andromeda sector. Interested? I'd like that, Zyra replied, her curiosity once again piqued. It seems I have much to learn about your galaxy, and there's no better teacher than you. As they left the negotiation hall together, Tom felt a renewed sense of purpose. Not only was he helping to forge new trade routes, but he was also bridging a gap between two very different cultures, one careful conversation at a time. Tom and Zyra made their way to the lower decks of the station where the cultural exhibit was in full swing. The corridor was aglow with holographic displays showcasing brilliant landscapes and cultural artifacts from various civilizations across the Andromeda sector. As they entered, Tom pointed to a particularly vivid display featuring a panoramic view of a pulsar. These exhibits are part of an initiative to foster understanding and appreciation among the diverse species and cultures on the station, he explained. Zyra's eyes gleamed with fascination as she absorbed the colorful images. It's beautiful, she remarked. The way you share knowledge. It's very open, very communal. In Zealer, knowledge is often guarded, revered, and sometimes hidden away. I guess every culture has its quirks, Tom replied with a smile. They continued to walk through the exhibit, stopping occasionally to interact with the display. As they approached a section dedicated to musical instruments from different worlds, they were greeted by another figure. He was a lanky man with a gentle demeanor, wearing a badge that identified him as a cultural specialist. Tom, good to see you here, he said, extending a hand. And you must be Zyra. I'm George. I oversee cultural programs on the station. Nice to meet you, George, Zyra responded warmly. This exhibit is impressive. The diversity is overwhelming. George beamed. That's the idea. Here, let me show you something really special. He led them to a display where a variety of musical instruments, ranging from string to wind, were arranged. These are from the echo cluster. Each instrument is tuned to resonate with the frequencies of different stars. Tom picked up a small, harp-like instrument, plucking its strings gently. The sound was soft, yet it filled the space around them with a haunting melody. Try this, Zyra. It's said to mimic the sound of the celestial winds of its home world. Zyra tentatively took the instrument, her fingers delicately maneuvering the strings. The melody she produced was tentative at first, then grew in confidence and beauty. That's really good, Tom commented, impressed. George nodded in agreement. Music does seem to be a universal language, Zyra said, setting the instrument down. It transcends words. George guided them to another area focused on culinary arts. Speaking of universal languages, have you two had lunch yet? Because this next part might make you hungry. The culinary section was a vibrant display of dishes and ingredients from across galaxies. A chef, in full attire, was giving a live demonstration. He noticed Tom and Zyra with George and waved them over. Chef Marco, this is Zyra from Zealer, and you know Tom. Zyra, Marco's dishes are legendary around here, George introduced. Chef Marco, a burly man with a welcoming grin, shook Zyra's hand enthusiastically. Welcome, welcome. You're just in time to try some human-style cooking with a universal twist. Ever tried Galician spice? Zyra shook her head, intrigued. No, I haven't. Perfect, Marco exclaimed, turning to his cooking station. Let's fix that. I'm making a stir-fry that uses it. The spice comes from a small planet in the Gliese system, known for its intense flavors. Tom and Zyra watched as Marco expertly chopped and stirred ingredients, the aroma filling the air around them. He handed them each a small plate with the finished dish. Be careful, it packs a punch, he warned with a wink. Zyra tasted it cautiously, then her eyes widened. Oh, that's powerful. And delicious. Good to hear. Marco laughed. Food, like music, has a way of bringing different folks together. What do you think, Tom? Absolutely, Tom agreed, enjoying the dish. It's about sharing pieces of our worlds with each other. Zyra nodded thoughtfully. You've given me much to think about, how openness and sharing culture can build bridges. As the trio continued to explore the exhibit, tasting, and learning, Tom felt a sense of accomplishment. Not only was he facilitating trade negotiations, but he was also helping foster a deeper cultural connection, proving that even in a galaxy filled with countless stars and species, common ground was always within reach. After their enriching experience at the cultural exhibit, Tom suggested they attend a recreational event hosted in the station's Central Dome, an area transformed into a venue for social gatherings. As they walked towards the dome, the station seemed to pulse with energy, alive with beings from diverse worlds. Every month, the station hosts a gala where delegates can unwind and mingle. It's less formal than the trade floors, more about making personal connections, Tom explained, leading Zyra through the bustling corridors. That sounds delightful, Zyra said, her eyes reflecting the bright lights as they approached the dome. Inside, the dome was a kaleidoscope of colors, lights dancing across the faces of the attendees. A band of musicians from various species played a lively tune, the beat universal despite its exotic origins. Tom spotted a familiar face in the crowd, a tall, slender man with an easy smile. Zyra, let me introduce you to someone, he said, guiding her through the crowd. Alex, over here. Alex turned, his smile widening when he saw Tom. Tom, glad you could make it. And who is this? His gaze settled on Zyra, curious and welcoming. This is Zyra, the Zari delegate I've been telling you about, Tom introduced. Zyra, Alex here is one of our top engineers. He's also a fantastic dancer. Zyra extended her hand, which Alex shook warmly. Pleased to meet you, Zyra. Anyone Tom speaks so highly of must be exceptional. Join us for a dance? I'd be honored, Zyra replied, her previous apprehension replaced by a trace of excitement. As Alex led Zyra onto the dance floor, Tom followed, watching as Zyra quickly picked up the rhythm, her movements graceful and fluid. Alex, an experienced dancer, matched her step for step, clearly impressed. You're a natural, Alex complimented, spinning her gently. Thank you, Alex. This is quite different from Zari dances, but I enjoy the challenge, Zyra laughed, her voice light and joyful. Tom joined them on the floor, and the three danced together, the music a lively backdrop to their laughter and conversation. After several songs, they retreated to a quieter corner to catch their breath. I must admit, this is much more enjoyable than I anticipated, Zyra said, sipping a drink Alex had fetched for her. It's all about finding joy in the little things, Alex replied, his demeanor relaxed. Speaking of joy, have you ever tried zero-gravity dancing? Zyra's eyes widened in surprise. Zero-gravity dancing? That sounds intriguing. It's one of the unique experiences we offer here. Think you'd be up for it? Alex asked, an adventurous glint in his eyes. Why not? Zyra agreed, her adventurous spirit kindled by the night's festivities. Tom grinned, leading the way to the zero-gravity chamber, a specialized area designed for weightless activities. Inside, they were fitted with safety gear, and soon, the gravity generators were dialed down, lifting them gently off the floor. Floating in zero gravity, Zyra giggled, the sensation new and exhilarating. Tom and Alex showed her basic maneuvers, spinning and twirling through the air, their bodies free from the confines of weight. This is incredible, Zyra exclaimed, tumbling gently before righting herself with Tom's help. It's a favorite among newcomers, Tom said, performing a slow somersault. It's like being a star adrift in space, free and unbound. As they floated, Tom and Alex shared stories of past gatherings and the friendships they'd forged in this very chamber. Zyra listened, her earlier formality melting away into genuine warmth and camaraderie. Eventually, they returned to the party, their spirits high and their bonds strengthened. The night had turned from a simple social event into a memorable adventure, showcasing the joy of new experiences and the fast-forming friendship between the human and alien delegates. As the gala wound down, Tom, Alex, and Zyra promised to meet again, not just as delegates and engineers, but as friends who had shared something truly special. They left the dome with plans to explore more of what the station, and their growing friendship, had to offer. The night of the gala had sparked a newfound closeness between Tom and Zyra, one that seemed poised to deepen. As they continued their cultural exchange, they began to explore more personal topics. One evening, they found themselves in Tom's quarters, a modest space adorned with souvenirs from his travels. Your quarters feel very lived in, Zyra observed, her gaze lingering on a framed photograph of a lush, green landscape. That's Earth, Tom said, following her gaze. It's my home. Or it was, before I started my work here. I miss it sometimes. The rain, the smell of wet earth. It sounds beautiful, Zyra replied, her voice soft. Zealand is arid, mostly deserts. We cherish water immensely. The conversation steered them towards their personal lives, a topic they had skirted around until now. Tom poured them each a drink, a mild alcoholic concoction popular among the station's human residents. Zyra, can I ask you something personal? Tom ventured, handing her a glass. Of course, she nodded, her expression open. What's it like, being so far from home? Do you get lonely? Tom asked, his curiosity genuine. Zyra took a sip of her drink, considering. I do. It's challenging, being surrounded by so many different species, each with their own customs. Sometimes I feel disconnected. I understand that, Tom empathized. It's one of the reasons I enjoy our talks so much. Despite our differences, talking to you feels familiar, comfortable. Zari smiled, her eyes meeting his. I feel the same. It's comforting to share these feelings with someone who understands. The mood shifted subtly, the space between them charged with an unspoken connection. Tom moved a little closer. Zari, I've been meaning to tell you. Suddenly, the door chimed, interrupting him. Sighing, Tom stood to answer it. He opened the door to find Alex, who looked apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, Tom, but there's an issue with the solar panel array. We need your linguistic skills to help sort out a misunderstanding with the tech team from Gyral. Of course, Tom said, turning back to Zari. Duty calls. But let's continue this conversation later. Definitely, Zari agreed, her disappointment masked by a professional nod. At the solar panel array, Tom and Alex met with the Gyral tech team, who were visibly frustrated. There's been a mix-up with the programming language, one of the Gyral technicians explained. Our systems aren't syncing properly with the stations. Tom listened carefully, then spoke to the team in their language, smoothing over the confusion with a calm demeanor. Alex watched impressed by how effortlessly Tom bridged the gap between differing technologies and cultures. Thanks, Tom. You have a way of making complex things seem simple, Alex said as they walked back to the residential area. It's all about finding common ground, Tom replied. Speaking of which, I was having an important conversation with Zari before you called. Alex raised an eyebrow, a teasing smile on his lips. Oh, something more than just cultural exchanges? Tom chuckled, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. Maybe. She's remarkable, Alex. Then don't let station duties keep you two apart too long, Alex advised, clapping Tom on the shoulder. Returning to his quarters, Tom found Zari still there, looking out the window at the stars. I'm sorry about the interruption, Tom began, but Zari turned, her expression understanding. It's part of life on the station, she said. But you were going to tell me something? Yes, Tom took a deep breath, his nerves steadied by her presence. I was going to say that I really appreciate the time we've spent together. You've made life here a lot less lonely. Zari's face softened, her earlier reserve melting away. And I was going to say, I feel the same. You've made this station feel a lot more like home. They moved closer, the previous interruption forgotten, their conversation turning into a quiet confession of mutual affection. In the small, lived-in space of Tom's quarters, amidst the stars and the vastness of space, a new connection was forged, intimate and real. After their heartfelt conversation, Zari invited Tom to visit her quarters for dinner. Tom was curious. He'd never seen where she resided on the station, and the invitation felt like a significant step forward in their relationship. When Tom arrived at Zari's quarters, he was struck by how different it looked from his own. The space was minimalist yet elegant, with soft lighting and art from Zealer adorning the walls. Zari greeted him at the door, a subtle nervousness beneath her calm exterior. I hope you like Zalari cuisine, Zari said as she led him to a small dining area where the table was set with an array of dishes. I'm sure I'll love anything you've prepared, Tom replied, smiling to put her at ease. They sat down, and Zari began to explain the dishes before them. Each one was carefully prepared to represent different aspects of Zalari culture, spicy, flavorful, and complex. As they ate, their conversation deepened, touching on dreams, aspirations, and fears. I've always wanted to explore more of the human sectors, Zari confessed, her gaze lingering on a piece of art depicting the galaxy. There's so much to see, so much history, and I've always wanted to learn more about alien cultures firsthand, not just through books and artifacts, Tom responded. Maybe we could explore together sometime. Zari smiled, the idea clearly appealing to her. I'd like that. After dinner, they moved to a seating area with a viewport looking out into space. Zari hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. Tom, there's something I need to tell you, she began, her voice serious. Back on Zealer, I'm considered what you might call nobility. There are expectations, responsibilities. Tom listened intently, nodding for her to continue. It's why I was so nervous about forming any attachments here. If things became serious, it could complicate diplomatic relations, or worse, lead to political repercussions back home. Tom took her hand, squeezing it gently. I understand, and I appreciate you telling me. We'll figure it out together, okay? Zari looked relieved, her eyes meeting his. Okay. The moment felt right, and slowly, almost hesitantly, Tom leaned in to kiss her. Zari responded in kind, the initial caution in their movements giving way to more confident, yet gentle exploration. The kiss deepened, driven by the emotions they'd held back for so long. They pulled away after a moment, breathless. I've wanted to do that for a while, Tom admitted, his voice a whisper. So have I, Zari confessed, a blush coloring her cheeks. The rest of the evening was spent in quiet conversation and laughter, the earlier tension dissolving into a comfortable intimacy. Eventually, Zari showed him to the guest room. You're welcome to stay here tonight, she offered, her tone tentative. Tom agreed, grateful for the invitation. Thank you, Zari, for everything. As Tom settled into the guest room, he reflected on the night. It had been one of revelations and new beginnings. Lying in bed, he couldn't help but feel optimistic about the future, whatever complexities it might hold. With Zari by his side, he felt ready to face them. In the quiet of the night, Tom realized that this station, floating in the vast expanse of space, had become more than just a place of work. It was a place where he had found connection, understanding, and perhaps, against all odds, a shot at love. The morning after their intimate evening, Tom and Zari awoke to a station abuzz with whispers and rumors. News of their relationship had somehow leaked, and it wasn't long before the implications became the center of heated discussions among the station's diverse inhabitants. Tom met Zari in the communal lounge, where they had agreed to have breakfast together. His expression was tense, reflecting the gravity of their situation. Zari, have you heard? Yes, Zari interrupted, her voice calm despite the turmoil. It seems our relationship has become a topic of interest. Before Tom could reply, another figure approached their table. It was George, the cultural specialist they had befriended. His usual cheerful demeanor was overshadowed by concern. Tom, Zari, there's talk that some of the delegates are uneasy. They're worried this might affect the upcoming negotiations. Tom sighed, rubbing his forehead. I was afraid of this. We've got to handle this delicately, or it could escalate into a full-blown diplomatic incident. Zari nodded, her eyes firm. We need to address this head-on. Perhaps we can clarify our intentions and assure everyone that our personal relationship will not interfere with our professional duties. Maybe we should speak to Richard, George suggested. As the trade director, he could help mediate this situation. Agreeing, the trio headed to Richard's office. Along the way, they could feel the eyes of others on them, their whispers barely concealed. It was an uncomfortable reminder of how quickly news traveled on the station. Arriving at Richard's office, they found him already in the midst of reviewing reports. He looked up, his expression serious. Tom, Zari, I've been expecting you. I assume this is about the rumors. Yes, Tom started. We want to address this before it affects our work. We believe we can maintain our professionalism. Richard listened as they explained, his expression thoughtful. Your relationship is indeed your own business. However, you must understand the concerns. This station is a nexus for trade and diplomacy. Personal entanglements, especially between human and alien delegates, can be complicated. We understand the concerns, Zari spoke up, her voice steady. But we also believe that our relationship could serve as a symbol of the very ideals this station stands for. Unity and cooperation across cultures. Richard pondered her words, then nodded slowly. Perhaps you're right. However, it's not just my opinion that matters. We'll need to convince the other delegates as well. Let us address them, Tom suggested. Give us a chance to speak at the next assembly. We can make it clear that our relationship is based on mutual respect and understanding, and that it will not interfere with our responsibilities. Richard agreed, albeit reluctantly. Very well. I'll arrange for you to speak at the assembly this afternoon. Be prepared. It might not be easy. That afternoon, as they stood before the assembly of delegates, Tom felt a surge of nerves. He glanced at Zari, who gave him a reassuring nod. Together, they addressed the assembly, speaking earnestly about their backgrounds, their roles on the station, and how their relationship developed naturally out of a deep respect for each other's cultures. We are here not just as delegates, but as advocates for the kind of understanding and cooperation that this station was built to foster, Zari concluded, her voice resonant in the quiet room. The room was silent for a moment after they finished. Then, slowly, applause began to build. It seemed their message had resonated with many of the delegates, who perhaps saw in their union a reflection of their own hopes for peace and cooperation. As they stepped down, George, who had watched from the sidelines, approached them, a broad smile on his face. "Well done, both of you. It seems you've managed to turn the tide." "Thanks, George," Tom said, relief evident in his voice. "Let's hope this clears the way for more understanding." Zari looked at Tom, her expression softening. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." As they left the assembly hall, hand in hand, it was clear that while challenges lay ahead, their resolve to face them together strengthened not just their bond, but potentially the very mission of the station itself. Following their heartfelt presentation at the assembly, Tom and Zari's relationship became an emblem of cultural integration for the station. Inspired by their openness, the station's leadership decided to host a series of seminars on interspecies relationships, using Tom and Zari's story as a cornerstone for broader discussions about unity and diversity. In the planning phase, Tom met with Richard and George to discuss the structure of these seminars. They sat in a conference room, surrounded by digital screens displaying potential topics and speakers. "I think it's important that we not only talk about the successes but also the challenges," Tom suggested, reviewing the agenda. "It's not always easy, and we shouldn't paint an overly simplistic picture." Richard nodded, tapping a stylus against his tablet. "Agreed. Let's also include sessions on legal and ethical considerations, as well as personal stories from other species who have formed similar bonds." George, ever the enthusiast for cultural enrichment, chimed in, "And let's have some interactive sessions. Perhaps workshops where participants can learn about each other's communication styles and cultural expressions." "That sounds fantastic," Zari said as she joined them, a stack of notes in her hands. "I've compiled some preliminary feedback from various delegates, and there's a strong interest in understanding human and Zalari relationship dynamics more deeply." "Excellent work, Zari," Richard complimented. "This could become a model for other stations and outposts. We're pioneering something significant here." The planning continued, with each of them contributing ideas and refining the schedule. Once they finalized the details, they began publicizing the seminar series across the station's communication channels. The day of the first seminar arrived. The main hall was filled with a diverse crowd, buzzing with anticipation. Tom and Zari stood at the podium, their previous nervousness replaced by a sense of purpose. "As we start today," Tom began, addressing the assembly, "we want to explore not just the joys of interspecies relationships, but also the complexities. We come from different worlds, literally and metaphorically, but there is so much we can learn from each other." Zari took over smoothly. "Our relationship started with a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of intentions. But through communication and a willingness to understand each other's backgrounds, we found common ground." The crowd listened intently as they alternated speaking, each point illustrated with examples from their personal journey and similar stories shared by others. After the presentation, the floor was opened for questions. A delegate from a newly integrated species asked, "How do you handle disagreements that stem from cultural differences?" Tom answered, "It's about respect. We take the time to understand why we might see things differently. It's not about changing each other, but understanding and accommodating where possible." The session ended with hearty applause, and many participants stayed behind to talk more informally. Tom and Zari, along with Richard and George, facilitated these smaller discussions, fostering a sense of community and shared learning. As the day concluded, Richard pulled Tom aside. "You know, this went even better than I'd hoped. There's talk of extending this program beyond our station, sharing our learnings with the broader interstellar community." Tom smiled, looking over at Zyra, who was laughing with a group of delegates. That's the dream, isn't it? To spread understanding and cooperation. I'm glad we're making a real impact. Zyra joined them, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. What's next for us? She asked. Well, Tom replied, taking her hand. We keep doing what we're doing. Speaking, sharing, loving. We keep showing that it's possible to build bridges, no matter how far the worlds are that we come from. As they left the hall together, their future seemed as bright as the stars that surrounded their floating home. The station, once just a nexus of trade, was becoming a living example of how diversity, embraced and understood, could lead to a unity that enriched every species involved.